Hi, welcome to the Energetic Leader podcast. In this episode, we are interviewing Shamiem Smail, who is a senior technology architect at the RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. Shamiem has over 25 years of experience ranging in technology operations, marketing, business development, as well as strategy consulting. Shamiem migrated to Australia a few years back, and even though she held very senior positions back in her home country, South Africa, when she came to Australia, she had to rebuild her career. And in this episode, we are exploring unique life principles and philosophies Shamiem used to not just establish and improve and enhance her career, but also to improve and enhance her personal life as well. We hope you would enjoy this episode, and if so, please do check it out till the end. And if you find resources like this useful, please check out www.pplay.com.au. There's a ton of useful resources there. Enjoy the episode. Yeah. Welcome to the Energetic Leader podcast. We're really thrilled to have you here today. So my name is Kush.
I'm Sunny. Hi.
And this is Shamiem from, as the first sort of like icebreaker question, we'll just maybe get a bit of a view as to how you started your professional journey, maybe just sort of like a 40,000 foot view, and then we'll just keep exploring after that.
Well, firstly, thank you so much, Sunny and Kush, for having me on, and thank you, Kush, for thinking of me. I'm really flattered, and it's good when someone can reach out from your past, into the present and say, what you're saying makes sense, it resonates with me, and I feel that connection. So thank you for that. In terms of where I started, my journey is long, and I'm not going to give my age away, because if I tell you where I started, it'll be a wow, you're that old. But yeah, no, I actually started many, many years ago back in South Africa. And you ask, where did your journey start? I think people go through many journeys in their lives. And with someone who's immigrated, what tends to happen is you almost need to step back in order to go forward within the journey. But effectively, I did not start in IT. My parents, so my stepdad and my mum, were both in IT. So what had happened was, around the eating table, all I heard was JCL, cron jobs, being called out. And I said, and I promised myself I would never get into IT, because I am not going to be called out in the middle of the night because someone forgot to put a full stop in the right place. So that's taking you, and I'm giving my age away when you know about the full stop. But yeah, so I promised myself I'd never get into IT. I was wanting to get into economics. I loved the world of economics. I loved the world of modeling. I loved how things influence and impact, and what both social, geographical, political influences had on lives and on people, and how you sort of microcosms fold out into the macrocosm. So that's what my interest was like. But unfortunately, in South Africa at the time, it was difficult to get into that pathway. So I did what I needed to from an education perspective, but I landed up going into more an investment type role, what in Australia is known as superannuation. So it was what we know as retirement annuities back home. And that's where I started working. But I kept coming back to saying, guys, you're doing this really not the wrong way, but you're taking the difficult path. There's a logic behind what we do. And every single time I had the conversations with people, they said, actually, you should be a programmer. And I was like, I was never going to be a programmer. And they kept saying, well, you think that way. I was like, oh, okay. And so that's what I did. I went and I did programming, and I got into programming, and I started right at the beginning in terms of trainee, did the courses, junior programmer, and I progressed that way within the financial services sector. What had happened at that point in time, .NET had just come out, and BizTalk was a big buzzword at that point in time from a Microsoft perspective. And I kind of thought, well, IntelliSense takes away the beauty of coding, because you just need to right click and it takes it away. So for me, I always got drawn to the business side of the world. And so I traveled the road of, the programming life up until sort of systems analyst, architect. Then I felt that wasn't of interest to me, and I wanted to do analysis, and I moved into business analysis. And every single architect and senior developer thought I had a lobotomy. They were like, that's it, stay away from us. And I just felt business was far more intriguing, and I moved into the world of business analysis. And obviously, because I've got a programming background, I've got an economics background, it made sense for me to progress quite fast through that line of thinking. And then I landed up doing internal consulting. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys in the internal consulting world left for the Big Four. And for 3 years, he kept on saying, come and work for me, come and work for me. And I said, no, I'm not interested. And then one day he said, what did you do this year that is different from the last 2 years? And I couldn't answer him. So I went and I joined him, and I started working for the Big Four as what they called an experience hire. But things were happening in South Africa, and I kind of felt I've got a family and I needed to afford opportunities to my kids that I potentially would not have. My mom took me aside and she said to me, Shamiem, you are either going to take your kids to the airport and say bye-bye to them standing over here, and they're going to be in that plane, or you're going to get on the plane with them. You make your decision. And she says, it's not a difficult decision. You've got to decide. And that's when we decided to start the ball rolling with the immigration process to Australia. Coming to Australia, as you all know, you need to have Australian experience, which kind of blew my mind in a way. I was like, I worked for the Big Four, EMEA, it really just blew my mind. But it is what it is. I had to do what I needed to do, and that's what I did. I took a step way back and I did business analysis. And that's what I started with in Melbourne Water. And then RMIT got me as a solution consultant. And eventually I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is sitting in the architecture team.
I noticed that, sorry to interrupt, I noticed that in your profile. Yeah. I saw that you'd progressed quite well in your career. And all of a sudden there was a business analyst role at Melbourne Water. And I thought I wanted to ask you that. So that answers that question. But yes, again, like you said, you have to take a path that you have to just sometimes, even when things don't make sense, we just have to, go by the rules, even if it doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And for me, it's all about the big why. So what drives you from a why perspective? So I think a lot of people, when they decide to take a different path in life in terms of leave their life behind, there are many reasons that they do it. But you've always got to be true to why you're doing it. And sometimes it means taking a step back, but it's not really a step back. It's really, like you say, Sunny, it's taking a different path to get to what your outcome is. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. The one thing that I do appreciate about Australia and its culture and its outlook on life is that people are not necessarily, and again, I may be naive, I've only been here 5 years, but people aren't judged on the position they hold.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making a good, honest living, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
So one thing, I guess, I remember when I left RMIT, one of the conversations you and I had, and you gifted me something when I left RMIT. You said, this is something that actually made a big difference in my life. And it was a book. And it's still one of my go-to books as well, similar to yours now.
Yeah.
And so the book is called The Alchemist. And
that's great.
Perhaps can you share the backstory of that and why has it been such a go-to resource for you? And what are the sort of like core principles that you've taken out of that book and then transitioned into your own life?
So The Alchemist was a book I read very, very early. It actually had just come out, and the author Pablo Coelho was not really well known. In fact, I think it started to blow out as a book that everybody started to go to is when I think Bill Clinton started reading it in his presidency. So that's how far back it goes. So it was probably 96 and I read the book. And for me, one of the things that gets to me is that it's a fable. And there are metaphors in every single line that you read. And I have probably read The Alchemist maybe 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. And every single time I feel, So it's one of those books that I feel, depending on what your mindset is at that point in time, when you read it, you see different things in the actual book itself. But one of the things that it speaks to is the fact that you need to find your legend. So what is it that drives you? What is it that you think you've been put on this earth for? And everybody's been put on the earth for different things. And not every everybody finds that particular legend. And one of the things that stands out for me in the book was when he's sitting and he says to the guy, the sitting next to him, the King of Solomon, he says, the baker over there, he says, wanted to be a traveler. And he says, can I run over and tell him? And he says, no, because you're just going to upset. Everybody needs to go through their own journey. Everybody needs to come to that realization themselves. And for me, that's something that happens in everybody's lives. We so often want to either speed the journey up for someone else, and they're not yet ready to learn the lesson that they need to learn. And one of the other things I've learned out of the book is that you will always be given the same lesson in different guises. But until you've truly learned the lesson, you're going to fall for it. So it's the same obstacle that you have, but it comes in different forms. You then need to learn what it is you need to take from it and move on. The other thing that I always take out is that I think people come to you in different times of your life. So they can either be there for a season, they can be there for a day, or they can be there for many seasons. And there's a reason why you interact with people. You're either going to teach them something, or they're going to teach you something, or there's a realization that you both have to come to. And it's just the way that I believe life is.
Well, that's
awesome.
so powerful, right?
Yes, very powerful, and perhaps so many things to explore in this particular thing.
I was actually taking notes as you were talking, so a little bit. So much of what you said, it's one that every time you go back to the book, it's the same book, it's the same text, but you get something different out of it depending on when it is that you're reading it. And I wonder if we react to situations in life like that. You may be encountered with the same situation, the same obstacle, and your response to it would just vary depending on where you are in your life. And if you're not prepared to face that obstacle, you may not respond to it at your best, or you may not choose the path that was, that could have taken you down the path of success. So I don't have a question. That's just what I think, and reading these texts and reading this, and learning from people around you, it just prepares you to face all those, gets you ready with all the perspectives in life that you have, as many perspectives as you can gather. So when you are faced with adversity or a challenge in life, you're ready to, just respond to it in the best way you can.
I agree. And I think what happens is we are in a world where we are bombarded with information. And when you think about it, your mind can only really process maybe 7 to 8 chunks of information. But what happens is it comes into you, and at the back of it, you've got, think about it, your cultural upbringing, your value set, your belief system, your experience in the past. So all of those actually play a factor in how you process that information. And so an example I've always used is there are 3 people sitting in a room. An anaconda slides into the room. Those 3 people, the first one is indifferent to snakes. I don't really care. The second one is petrified of a snake. The third one loves snakes. The event is exactly the same. It's an anaconda sliding into the room, but the reactions is vastly different from all 3 people. And the event hasn't changed. It's someone's reaction, their belief, their past experience that really colors how they react to that particular event. And that happens in life as well. Think about how many times people sit and it's exactly the same thing happens. A manager comes in or an individual comes in and says, this is what's happening. And you see different reactions from different people. It's because their life experience is different, their belief system is different, their values are different, and the way they process information is very different. It's the same thing that's being said.
Yeah. And maybe if I can ask a related question, Shamiem. So when we look at a book like The Alchemist, and so sounds like it is your go-to kind of books, right? Regular read. Maybe in a practical sense, how has it assisted you in a professional career kind of setup? Is there an example that comes to your mind? Faced with a challenge and immediately the learning from the book came to your mind?
Yes, there is. The one example that comes to mind all the time is where he speaks about this miner giving up everything and starting to mine for emeralds. And he says that at the beginning, the universe conspires in your favor to get you there. But when you're about to reach your goal, the universe is going to test that you've learned the lessons you need to learn before you reach the goals. And he says that the miner was so close to actually uncovering these emeralds, but in pure frustration, he wanted to give up. And so the skin of Slalom says, well, what I did was I changed myself into a stone or a rock, and out of frustration, he kicked it and it ricocheted and it exposed what is there. And for me, it's a question of, if you know what your value is, if you know what your legend is, if you know what your big why is, you've got to dig deep. You're not always going to get it, but if the belief is there and the why is big enough for you to want to go and get what it is you want, it's not always going to be easy. And it's when you face those challenges, it's a time when you've got to believe, I'm getting so close to what I need to. Is my belief there, not only in my why, but in myself. And I think people come with universal fears in terms of the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not belonging, the fear of being judged. And you have to go through those fears, and you've got to learn how to deal with it for yourself in order to reach what it is you want to achieve. So those are the things that come out when I think of work situations as well.
That's super, super awesome. So maybe if I can ask another follow-up question. Sorry, I'm taking all the time. So
No, that's fine.
how do you, so in principle, makes perfect sense, right? So how do you work out when is the right time to quit? Because there are certain endeavors and ventures you really need to call it quits, right? It's enough. How do you balance that? I wonder what your experience and thinking on that matter is.
So look, I'll be honest. I've been in situations where I have been gaslighted. I've been in situations where I have been made to feel not worthy of what I should have believed to be mine. I think it's a question of saying, how do I become true to myself? Because it's not anyone else's journey. It's your own journey that you need to undertake. So there are always going to be people who are way better than what you are getting to do, doing the things that you think you want to do. But if you're true to yourself and it resonates with you, again, I go back to understanding what is your purpose, what are the values you have, what are your beliefs, and these are not beliefs from a religious perspective, a philosophical perspective. These are things you hold true to yourself. What are the standards that you set for yourself, and what are the expectations you have of others? And only once you've firmed that up within yourself, that is when you know, I need to stay the course, because by staying the course, I'm being true to myself. I'm not trying to reach someone else's agenda. I'm not trying to do what someone else wants me to do. And by staying true to yourself, you'll know this is where I need to go. And this is what I need to stay the course for. Because a lot of the times you go and you think, oh, I'm going to do it because it sounds good. I'm going to do it because people want me to do that. There's an expectation from family, from friends, from society, etc., etc. But that's not being true to yourself. And you know, there are things that I say, for instance, to my daughter. I say, the only gift I can give you is I can give you roots and I can give you wings. What you do in between, I don't have a say in. But whilst you have those roots and I've given you the wings to enable you, always be brave, be bold, be courageous, but most importantly, be gracious. Because it's in that grace that you'll be able to see the world for what it is and, you know, accept people for who they are. Does that make sense, Krish?
It makes
total
sense.
It does. So many questions. Do you want me to keep firing? Maybe I'll hand it over to you. Otherwise, I'm going to hold this.
No. This is a conversation. Values. I mean, you've touched on that a few times. Is that something you're open to talking about a bit more? Like what it is that you prioritize? I mean, it's an exercise I've gone through my personal self. You know, for me, trust comes out on top of a lot of other things. Loyalty comes out on top of other things. What is it that you value the most, and how has holding firm onto that value and that belief led you to this path as opposed to another that you could have taken where you wouldn't be in Australia, or you wouldn't be in your role, or you wouldn't, could have been any number of things.
So for me, one of the things that I hold true, a couple of them, one of them is family. So the value of family and kinship. Also the value of, like you say, trust and loyalty. And for me, trust is something that's earned.
Yeah.
And it's so fragile. It can be broken at any point in time. And because kinship and family is one of my top values, so often we feel that, especially with younger people within the family, within the kinship, you automatically expect trust to be given and received, but that's not the case. It is really something that needs to be built, and it's something that it's almost like a very fragile glass container that you hold, that can, if you squeeze it too tight, it's going to crack. If you hold it too loosely, it's going to slip out of your hand and break. So you've got to just have the right amount of pressure to be able to hold on to it in terms of that trust from a kinship perspective. Loyalty is something that I treasure, but that falls hand in hand with kinship, family, and trust. Yeah.
Correct. Awesome. So maybe I remembered when I connected with you just to talk about the podcast and how we think you'd be a great guest and all that stuff. I think something we started talking about in terms of when someone starts their career at the very beginning. I don't exactly remember how we got to that point, but something you told me I started reflecting. I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I wanted to sort of like dig a bit deep on this. You said one of the things most people do when they start their career is not setting boundaries. We sort of like tend to think, I'm a beginner. I shouldn't set any boundaries. I should say yes to everything my peers say, my bosses say, and just go with it. And then we learn the art of setting boundaries as we progress through the career, maybe when we come to senior levels. But then it becomes such a hard thing to do because we are always used to saying yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe are you able to expand on that and maybe give us some tips, because early to mid-career professionals who'll be listening in on this, they might get some golden nuggets out of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely fair. And boundaries is and I'll be honest with you, it's a challenge that I still face till today, purely because, again, one of my values is to share. So I always want to share. And what tends to happen is, if you don't set the boundary and respect yourself and set that expectation, you tend to overshare. And as a result, people could take advantage of it. And so you've almost got to turn around and say, my value may be to share, but my value is also to respect myself. And by respecting myself, I need to set that boundary. So people do have the tendency to step over the line. Not everybody, but people do. But I think one of the things that becomes important, especially as a young individual, and dare I say, and I don't want this, my daughter would say I'm being gender biased, but as a young female, you want to please. And you don't quite know, you feel that if I set a boundary, I'm going to be limiting my options. Now, I believe you can set boundaries without limiting your options. And the way you do that is to know what is true to you. So what is it that you effectively believe in? What can't be shaken in terms of your belief system? And then knowing that if I set the boundary and this opportunity passes, it will come past again because it wasn't right for me at that point in time.
Yeah. I think probably that's a very powerful and useful way to look at it, isn't it? An opportunity, a short-term opportunity might pass by, but that doesn't mean that's the only opportunity. A similar or better opportunity might come through, but you'd be more resilient and you'd be more mature to take on that opportunity just by going through that process. Completely agree with that. Perhaps on a similar trajectory, Shamiem, what's the hardest challenge you had to overcome in your career thus far?
So
or in life in general, whatever.
No. That's absolutely fair. I think for me, there's always this need to, I said to you the three of I'm not good enough, I don't belong, will I be judged? Those are fears that people have throughout their lives. And I think it takes a very strong person to get to the point where you feel those fears don't surface in some form or the other. And so coming into a new country, one of the things that you constantly feel is, well, am I good enough for the market? Will I be judged? So for me, it was, yes, taking the step back, but that was okay to take the step back. Like I said, given the culture of Australia where people don't necessarily judge you by the job that you hold or the title that you hold. But it was my internal demons and the frustrations of, this can be done better. There's a better way to look at this. But there's also very much that whole tall poppy syndrome that exists within the culture. So by saying this can be done differently, we can look at it differently, what you do is you effectively expose yourself to people reacting to you, and you then feel, oh, I'm not good enough. Am I being judged? So there's a vicious cycle that happens. So for me, it was a question of saying, be brave, be bold, be courageous, but most importantly, be gracious about it. And it's okay if people judge you, because understand that it's not a reflection on you, but a reflection on them. It's their insecurities that are coming up. It's their sense of inadequacy that may be coming up. It may be a value, a belief, an environmental experience that they've undergone that you don't know. So it's got nothing to do with you per se. But to get to that point is very difficult.
I couldn't agree more with that last statement you made, that to get to that point is very difficult because you always shine the light on yourself first. And you always go into that state of self-doubt first before even thinking about there might be others in the room who are not aligned to you because of whatever their reason may be.
Yeah.
And we always tend to think, it's me.
Yeah,
and
very much so.
And that's a hard realization. That's I have to say, I probably still do that. May have the answer to a question, but if someone speaks up and says, perhaps not, you start to doubt yourself. That's the very first.
Yeah.
And that's, I've experienced this many times as well. Like, especially in meetings, sometimes, you're presented with something and you think about it and you have all these questions and then you think, should I ask that question? Yeah. Or is that like too simple? Maybe it might be, others might think I'm actually not understanding any of it. My knowledge and skill set is not that great. But most of the times when I do ask the question after those presentations and meetings, people, when I connect with them, they say, I was thinking about the same question. So everyone's thinking, and most of the times we think if we ask that, it's just gonna make us look or sound a bit dumb or not that witty, but it's not the case. So I think going through the process, and as long as one of the things I try to internalize is, as long as it's a curious question for me, I ask it regardless, because that's for my own curiosity.
Yeah.
And perhaps in the process, others would benefit as well.
Yeah, you've actually hit the nail on the head. You come at the question from a sense of curiosity. And in my personal opinion, as long as you've been curious about it and you're not trying to sort of show someone up, or you're not, there's no malice in the question, and it's purely based from a place of curiosity, one of two things are going to happen. People are going to be like, that's the question I had in their mind. Or if it is something that's known, by someone answering the question and restating the answer to the question, all it does is it further embeds and clarifies the understanding across the board.
Correct.
Because I think all too often what happens, and this is something that I've been saying for a long time, is that precision of language is so important. Because all too often people are talking or using the same term but there's a totally different understanding. And you get to the point where, I'll give you an example in work life. Integration. What does integration mean? Well, you could be speaking about data integration. You could be speaking about application integration. You could be speaking about process integration. You could be speaking a whole lot of other integrations from a business perspective, vertical, horizontal, etc. So you go and you speak to people about integration, and you think of it in your mind. Oh, I'm thinking data, and I'm thinking, application and maybe process. Someone else is thinking about something totally different. And you have the conversation and everybody's agreeing, yes, that's exactly what we want, blah, blah, blah. 3-4 months later, you present them with whatever it is you needed to present as an artifact. And people are like, actually, that's not what I had in mind. Whereas it would have taken maybe a little bit more time at the beginning to say, okay, let's understand what you mean by integration. This is what I mean by integration. Is it exactly the same thing you're thinking about? No, it's not. Fine. Let's then understand what it is we're going to deal with right now. And are you comfortable with us only dealing with that component? And that is what we're going to deliver at the end of the day. If not, then we need to relook at this conversation in totality, because we're not going to get to the same point.
Yeah.
But that's something that people don't clarify. So again, I believe there's no thing as a silly question, as long as you're asking it from us a point of curiosity.
Absolutely.
Not malice by any way.
Yeah.
And precision of language, which is the sort of how you described it earlier. It is fascinating how many executive level conversations you sometimes come out of or listen in on, where at the end of it, two parties come away with just very different conclusions. And it is fascinating. You would think after years and years in this profession, because no one wants to ask, no one wants to seem like they didn't understand it. And secondly, if sometimes they do, the way it's phrased, the way it's communicated, it's not clear or precise. And again, I work in sort of I've been in consulting and sort of strategy side of things, and it is fascinating how many conversations you sit on where people at the end of it walk away with two different conclusions.
Exactly. And they think that they both understand it. Yeah. There's another book. Sorry, there's another book that I think is actually quite good as well, and it's called The Resilience Project.
Funny enough, one of my nephews talked about this book on the weekend. He was like, I'm reading this book. Yeah. Have you read it? I'm like, no, I have heard about the book. I haven't read it. What's the spiel?
It's about gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And it's strange, I always give out the Alchemist, but I also give out this Resilience Project as well. It was introduced to me by my husband, my partner, and he bought it for my son. And so we've got many copies floating around as well. And it was going, Big W had this massive sale on it. So I bought it for a lot of people at RMIT because I kind of felt, how often do you say and keep a journal about, I love this, so I'm grateful for it, and I rocked at this, and I'm grateful because I rocked at it. How often do we actually just take time, either in the morning or in the evening, and actually just be mindful about what you've been through, but then also reflect on what you're grateful for? Because you go through life and you say, oh, I've got to have, or I've got to do. But it's not so much about having, and doing. It's about being and giving. So who do I need to be in order to give, and in order to do what I need to do, and then I will have what I need to have, and then also give what I need to give. So it's that whole grateful. How do I become grateful? Because there's so many things to be grateful about. And he speaks about it in the book. And it's a question of, why is it that people who come from impoverished third world countries can be so happy with the simplest things in life? And it's about that sense of gratitude.
Fantastic. So the Alchemist and the Resilience Project. And you also shared two other sort of like literature when I connected with you. One is The Man in the Arena.
Yes.
And the other one is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost.
That's correct.
And I mean, masterpieces when you actually read through it, and they're quite short pieces of literature. But if we truly understand it and internalize it, a lot of great things can happen.
That's true. It's very true. Yeah.
You go for it.
No. So and again, it's like The Alchemist. You take different things from it when you read it at different points in your life. Even in the same day, depending on how you're feeling, you just take, like, the road less taken can be so different at different points in your life. The Man in the Arena spoke to me because of a series of audiobooks that I'm listening to, Brené Brown. So she speaks about vulnerability, and that's the one thing that people don't want to be, is vulnerable. And there's beauty in that vulnerability. You can only be your authentic self when you are vulnerable.
Absolutely. Maybe this might be a good segue into the question around how do you keep yourself in high energy and focused states? Because you have a demanding professional career, family life, social commitments, so on and so forth. And on top of that, you have a insatiable kind of appetite to develop yourself more and more through reading, audiobooks, all that stuff. How do you keep yourself in high energy states when all these things happen?
I think for me, it's really about understanding what is it that I care about and investing in that, and also knowing the difference between what is important versus what is urgent. Because you need to look after what is important. Because if you don't, your life becomes a series of urgent, and you never take care of what is important. The other thing that I must be honest, COVID hasn't been that great, but I need to get back to it. So I've slowly gotten back to it because my kids have started doing it, is the whole exercise thing. Yoga is really, really good in terms of mindfulness, in terms of centering yourself, in terms of meditation as well. And even if it's just a 5-10 minute meditation, and that's where gratefulness comes into play as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So if you are grateful about what you have, where you are, where life has taken you, and if someone else has to look at it and say, how can you be grateful about that? Well, I can be grateful about something because it's taught me a lesson that I may not have learned in any other way. So given that, I am grateful because I would never be in the position I am. So in terms of high energy, I think it's about both the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional. How do you connect with those three? And the psychological as well. So how do you connect?
Great. I think we can keep talking about these things for hours and hours. And so the last segment of this podcast is this sort of like fill in the blank type of questions, short and sharp kind of questions. The first thing that comes to your mind, the gut feel sort of like answer. So maybe let's start with the first one. When things get really challenging, I
reach into myself and I expand on my why and relive my why.
Okay. Let's just take a moment to absorb that. I know we've discussed it, but it is just such a fundamental sort of thing to keep in your mind, because it's easy to remember that when things are going well, but it's just when things get challenging that you just need to tap into that why. Question for me is, when you know you have to make a decision that will lead to short-term pain but long-term gain, I construct my thinking by
knowing what I care about. Okay. I also construct my thinking by almost, and I write this down all the time, I imagine a day in the life of what it is that I want. So what would it look like? Wake up in the morning, what are the sounds I'm hearing? What are the smells that I'm smelling? What am I feeling? So I go through all my 5 senses and say, this is what I want to experience. And by doing that, you know what it is you're looking forward to. and this is what you care for.
Fascinating. Another question. When I know I don't or won't have all the facts to make an informed decision, what I do is?
Like I said previously, I look at what is important versus what is urgent. Because all too often, you could get into that cycle of urgent, but it's not really that important.
Yeah.
Well, an amazing conversation.
I've been taking notes.
So I think what perhaps we would love to have you back for another sort of like round two. I think there's a lot more to unpack. What the time we have is short. Probably we'll pick a specific area and then we'll dig deep next time.
I think it's probably worthy of just choosing an area and just going deeper in it. And this has been a good sort of overarching, fascinating conversation, I might add.
Cool. So, Shamiem, thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And we are really looking forward to connecting with you again and then explore another branch.
Thank you for having me on board. I'm really grateful that you saw it in yourself, Christian and Sunny, for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak, because I believe in growing people. I come from a culture that believes that it does take a village to raise children, to raise a family, to raise people, and to uplift people. And it's only through that giving of yourself that you truly start looking at what is important, and you contribute back and you give back to, people. And without people, where would we be? We're all interconnected.
Love that philosophy. So, Shamiem, thank you again, and we'll connect back with you soon.
Wonderful.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Kevin.